Let's get in somebody who's looked at it so closely for so many years now, right? And somebody who we all look up to hear about how does he think about businesses, about businessmen, and more. Ramesh Damani, market veteran, with us on the show. Ramesh, so good of you to take the time out and speak to us early this morning. Thank you. How do you feel about this? Because as we were saying, that it's almost like a personal loss to every single Indian.
Yeah, good morning, Neeraj. Thank you. And your guys are absolutely right. We woke up to a Saturday today, no question about it. I think in many ways he was, of course, the conscious keeper for India. He was, of course, an entrepreneur, a pioneer, visionary, as all of you correctly stated. But more importantly, I think he was the conscious keeper for this India. You know, there's a favorite prayer of mine by Saint Francis of Assisi, and the last three lines of the prayer say, "It is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in death that we are born to eternal life." Not only was he wholesale in terms of his giving of his money, his time, his abilities, but also the kind of structure that he's built up and carried on for the Tata. He's a true apostle of Tata. I think his life and legacy, as you all have correctly pointed out, will live on. So RIP to a great Indian avatar and a great Indian hero.
Mr. Damani, I was listening to one of the last interviews of Mr. Ratan Tata, and he was asked, how do you want to be remembered? And he said, as someone who made a difference. I think that's one goal completely achieved, no matter in what sphere, and not only in just business, and touching so many people's lives, isn't it?
Absolutely. And difference in terms of lasting difference. It's not like a temporary difference or a stock price difference, as the Wall Street is prone to say. You know, the one thing that's unappreciated from my office at the Wall Street on BSC to Bombay House is a very short walk to there. And one of the underappreciated factors, at least for the market, has been that we often talked about the public sector leading the market up or the banks leading the market higher. What we don't appreciate is how well the Tata group of companies have done based on the framework he set. I mean, Trent has become a household name today. TCS continues to power ahead. Titan has become a nationally brand name. Tata Consumer has done well. Indian Hotels has done well. So part of the leadership in this bull market that we're seeing has come from Tata House and originated in Bombay House. And of course, the plan that he set in motion 91, 92 when India liberalized first.
Right. We also have Mukund Rajan, author of the brand Custodian-My Years with the Tatas, joining us. Hi, good morning, Mukund. It's Amina. It's with great sorrow that we report this morning the loss of a very precious gem to the nation. You of all, and I know this, have worked so closely with Tata ji. You want to just talk to us about that experience, the learnings, the life with the Tatas, the glorious life of the man himself?
You know, it's a great loss. I think he was somebody who really encouraged young talent. I joined his office as a rookie in my early 20s in the 1990s. That was, of course, a period of tremendous pressure, I think, that he was going through, trying to ensure that the Tatas came unscathed through the period of liberalization and the entry of a large number of multinationals into the Indian market, all of them challenging the flagship Tata companies like Tata Motors and Tata Steel. And then through the 2000s, you saw the group really taking wings. I think once the home turf had been defended well, I think through the 2000s, Ratan Tata really set the ambition for the group to become a global enterprise. And you saw the way in which the Tata Group really grew tenfold in revenues from the early 2000s till the time he actually hung up his boots. But more than, I think, his determination to ensure Tatas are successful, you really warm to the man, the human being, the person that he was, somebody who really cared about India, cared about the poor in this country. And obviously, as a philanthropist, as the chairman of India's largest charities, there was an enormous amount of good that he was able to do. So, working closely with somebody like that and watching the way he thought about business and the way it needed to be prosecuted was an incredible learning experience for me, for which I'll be ever grateful to him.
Mukund, Sajid here, I clearly remember the kind of auction fight that happened for Chorus. If you can take us through, that entire process where he wanted Chorus and he went on to aggressively bid for Chorus.
So I think he was very keen that Tata Steel really sort of bloom as a company that had enormous capability, that had already cemented its position in the Indian market. And he was a little nervous that opportunity after opportunity was being missed by the company to really expand overseas. I remember seeing notes from him on the progress that rival groups, including ArcelorMittal, were making at the time. And he just felt that management needed a bit more ambition and boldness. I suspect he was not very pleased eventually with the outcome of the Chorus bid, because we acquired it at a time and at a price that in retrospect turned out perhaps to be not the greatest of moves. And for a long time after that, Tata Steel has tried to sort of repair some of the stress that produced for its balance sheet. But I think just in terms of the challenge that he set out to the management and the determination to succeed with one major move for this particular company, I think the management worked in tandem with him, and eventually they succeeded in the bid. But sometimes, you can get these things wrong. And unfortunately, luck was not on his side. Soon after you had the global financial crisis, you soon discovered that banks would be fair weather friends. And a lot of the debt that company racked up for many years later had to be repaid at a high price.
Ramesh, it's interesting though, and I'm just taking a leaf from what Mukund Rajan just said, right? That the same thing was spoken about when JLR was acquired. For the longest time, the Achilles heel for Tata Motors, and then turning out to be the driving force for Tata Motors. So in some sense, it's not just as much about what an individual decision might have done to a particular company, but just the whole will of thought, as Mukund Rajan put out, that once the home turf was guarded well, it took wings on the global arena, and the kind of acquisitions, even the hotel acquisitions that have been done on the global scale. It's just astounding what the man thought for the Tata Group and for the nation.
I mean, Neeraj, as you correctly point out, he was a pioneer. And I think today, if India looks further and sees better, is because they're standing on shoulders of giants like him. So you're absolutely right. He had a visionary thought and the ability to put money on the table. But I think ultimately, as we've all pointed out, what really mattered is that he was a true apostle of the Tata culture, the Tata values. And I think India needs to incorporate these lessons. There were a couple of scandals during his tenure, one of them being Tata Finance, one of being, of course, the terrorist attack in Mumbai that happened. And the way he reacted to that with the correct moral principle, not sweeping it under the ground, taking charge of, paying back the shareholders of Tata Finance, even though he was not obligated to do that. I think these are extraordinary judgments in what was actually the Tata's blackest days turned out to be their finest hours, because the reinstatement of the principles and the vision that the Tata Group has had since the founding of Jamsetji Tata a few hundred years back.
Mukund, I think you've had the opportunity to spend time close up with Mr. Ratan Tata, and a lot of our viewers today may want to understand the kind of person. Of course, someone who looked at philanthropy, looked at the greater good, but someone who also lived a very simple life himself, despite, I think luxury being part of his life from day one. Very simple in his taste, isn't it? What was your own learning of the person?
He was actually quite a shy individual, somewhat of an introvert. Certainly not somebody who was part of the Bombay cocktail party circuit. He had a very close and small social group. And really, Tata's in the business to a great extent was his life. Remember, he carried the surname and he felt very deeply, passionately about the need to really take this group to higher levels. He also walked into very big shoes when he succeeded his predecessor, J.R.D. Tata. And you will recollect that there were question marks about his ability to really grow this business after what J.R.D. Tata had already done. So really, Tata's was his life for him. And yet all the power, the glory, the pomp that surrounds the office of the chairman of India's largest corporate house, he never let that sort of go to his head. He was a very simple, grounded individual. I often joke that he was one of those rare Indian corporate leaders who at the airport would insist on carrying his own bags. He didn't have an entourage. So the man was very simple in his taste. He's also very, very much fun to be with, a tremendous sense of humor. He's an extraordinary mimic. I remember this one time when in a Tata Sons board meeting, He often used to doodle when meetings used to go on a little longer than they needed to. And he drew this wonderful caricature of three of his colleagues, much older than him, gentlemen, venerable directors of Tata Sons in their 80s, all bald. And he drew these three bald pates from the back, from the rear. These were Messrs. Sabawala, Sunawala, and Setna. And later he showed it to them, and they were really pleased with his artistic efforts. And he actually made a print of this and sent it out to the three of them, titling it The Three S's by Ratan Tata. So a man who was, great fun to be with, very simple, very decent, fun-loving human being.
And, you have a smile on your face when you talk about him so fondly, and this just goes to show the kind of impact he's left on people like you who was lucky and fortunate to work with him. Also, one line that I read that said, one wet monsoon evening, not many moons ago, dog lover Ratan Tata had decreed that any strays outside the Tata headquarters in downtown Mumbai be allowed shelter. He goes on to say, the writer, that some never left, but the man himself is no more. When did all this start? Do you think, we talk about Tata ji with a lot of fondness when we talk about philanthropy and the amount of work he's done to give back to the nation, to the humans. Was this early on, or did this come with age, time, and I guess just life?
I guess a bit of both, but he'd always been a dog lover. He had this first Alsatian that early on in his chairmanship, he took in a dog that he called Tito. And he became very, very close to it. And it's a bit to do with also the fact that, at that rarefied level of being the head of a very large corporate enterprise, when you have very few friends, very few people you can open up with, you are looking yet for companionship. And remember, he was a bachelor, so there's very little close family within his quarters. So he became very attached to Tito. And I think years later, when Tito passed on, he brought in two more dogs, Tito and Tango. And that remained an abiding passion for him to really, take care of dogs. Wherever he went, if he saw dogs, he'd sort of warm to them and they would warm to him. And he insisted later on that in Bombay House as well, a shelter be created for the strays that were around Bombay House. All of them were provided collars. So really a man who cared about the well-being of pretty much all living things. And in that context, let me also say that a great believer in environmental protection. It was his doing that led to CI, the Confederation of Indian Industry, creating his environment division. He was, I think, the only Indian industrialist who was involved at the Earth Summit way back in 1992 in drafting an important seminal document for global industry called Changing Course. So somebody who really was concerned about life and the quality of life in all its dimensions for all living beings, certainly including human beings, but also animals.
Mukund, take us through, the way he planned the entire succession for the entire group, not just from the corporate side of it, but also from the philanthropy side of it. How he brought in some of the good professionals and corporate heads to be part of those philanthropy, where Vijay Singh or Venu Srinivasan heading those trusts, which is now as vice chairperson of those trusts.
Well, I don't think it would be fair for me to say very much because I was not privy to some of the thought process. Some of those appointments have happened in recent years when I'd lost touch with him. But I would say this, that he was not somebody who at all was concerned about family, about religion or community. He always looked out for the best person for the job. So expectations, for instance, that succession would happen within the family or succession would happen necessarily within the Parsi community, I think were quite unfounded. And he's demonstrated that repeatedly in the leadership roles that he offered a number of people, both from within the group, as well as lateral hires that were made into Tata Sons, into various Tata companies. So I don't think from a succession perspective, he would have been concerned about the genetics, but he was certainly concerned about merit. And that is something that I think he strived to do. Obviously, there were colossal and tragic failures, in particular the fallout between him and Cyrus Mistry, which I think led to a series of events which perhaps he had not planned. But one can only hope that now, in the wake of his passing, good sense will prevail and the right thing will be done in terms of ensuring that both in the Tata Group as well as the charities, his thought process that the best person for the job should be appointed always.
I'm glad we're talking about all parts of his life, the challenging ones as well, because obviously such a storied life comes with its ups and downs, but how he dealt with those challenges is what's important. And Mr. Damani, I want to come to you on that. At the end of the day, when we look at the legacy, and we've spoken about the philanthropy, we've spoken about the charitable businesses, the interest in startups, but if you had to sum up the kind of wealth creation and contribution to India, the Indian economy, your top software company, your cutting edge automobile company, of course, every side of the business which has been covered. How would you sum that up?
I mean, it starts not with him actually 100 years ago with the Tata legacy and setting up Tata Iron and Steel and Indian hotels at the time when it was a funny idea to do that. I think he carried the legacy forward that Jamshedji did and JRD did by internationalizing the group. That was the first thing he did. And by focusing on the wealth creation, the return on capital, which ultimately led to it becoming the most serious conglomerate out of India. And as I mentioned earlier to you also, that a large part of this bull market has been led by Tata shares. That's a bit underappreciated because they always do well. And these are the shares that investors go for safety. In good times, in bad times, investors, I think they have the most loyal shareholder base that I can think of any company in India. There are people who are legendary who never sell the Tata shares no matter what. And I think for good reason, because they've always been a custodian for shareholders and the shares over time have appreciated, many-fold. So I think part of his legacy, of course, was that he remade the group in his own image by internationalizing the group, by making sure that they focused on earnings and making sure that they delivered for the shareholders too, apart from, of course, the philanthropic and the other causes that he was known for.
Ramesh, a question, and this could well have been to Mukund Rajan as well, but Ramesh, I'm asking this to you because you would have looked at this from an investing lens for such a long time. It would take some effort for a group to be the first name when it comes to anything related to ESG valuations, right? No matter what happened to profits, no matter what happened to revenues, but when you speak to every global investor that when they think of investing into a Tata group, they are like, everything else notwithstanding, the ESG quotient is completely clear, corporate governance is extremely clear, and there are many groups like that. But this one always kind of came out as first amongst equals. It would take some serious effort, right, Ramesh? Decade after decade to maintain that and come out trumps. I mean, from an investor's lens, Ramesh, what would go behind such a thing?
Yeah, Neeraj, I think the thing that will be examined in business schools and by corporate analysts is what happened in Tata Finance around the turn of the century when they had a bad management team out there that had milked the basic finance of the company by investing in speculative stocks on the last street, as a matter of fact. And when a whistleblower pointed this out, a thorough investigation was committed. They realized what had happened. And instead of sweeping it under the club and saying, under the carpet and saying, well, our liability is limited to the extent of our contribution to the capital, I think Tatas came out with a statement saying that we will hold responsibility for everything, no matter we are legally responsible or not. In fact, if you read the latest book by Mr. Gopal Krishna Harish Bhatt, they even kept a helicopter on standby. If someone in outer India wanted money at a moment's notice, they would fly the money in there. As it turned out, the trust in the Tata brand name was so strong that no one really requested the money and everything went smoothly. But I think there are very few iconic brands in India where people instinctively know that everything is going to be fair and everything is going to be above board. And I have no doubt that Tata's, and thanks a lot, large part to Mr. Ratan Tata's legacy, stands as one of those brands in India that is undiminished, undiluted. And I think as one of the papers said this morning, he was a true Ratan.
Right, he definitely was a true Ratan. Mukund, I think Neeraj talked to Ramesh about ESG, and I know how close to your heart ESG is. Two topics that are close to your heart, of course, Ratan Tata and ESG. You want to talk to me and tell me about the impact he's left on you as an individual and the fact that you actually work in the ESG space. Would you thank Tata sir for that, or the career that he charted out for you in more ways than one? And also, just for our viewers, one memory that's been, etched in your mind forever, which was with Tata sir.
So one of the reasons I joined the Tatas through the Tata Administrative Service, and he in fact interviewed me for the Tata Administrative Service, he was the chairman of the selection committee in 1994, was the fact that Tatas were one of those rare Indian groups at that time that were genuinely committed to the cause of the environment. And environment had been the subject of my master's and doctoral dissertations at Oxford University when I came back and interviewed with him. The one thing that I will remember is after he invited me to join his office, I remember telling him that, Mr. Tata, I need you to know that, I have a master's and a doctorate, but that's in political science. I don't have an MBA. So are you really sure that you want to go ahead with this appointment, and will I really be able to add value to you? And his response to me was something that will be forever etched in my mind. He said, to succeed in the corporate world, all you need is good common sense. And that's something that was so true about the man. He followed his instinct and he did these huge, big, bold, ambitious moves. I don't think he crunched the numbers like some people necessarily would, but he had a broad vision and a broad sense of where he wanted to take the group. And that rubbed off on all of those people who joined and worked for the Tatas, worked for him. We didn't work for money. Tatas are never the best paid masters. But you work because you knew that this is a group that is dedicated to doing the right thing, and you could sleep easy at night knowing that corporate governance was in hand and no shortcuts would be taken, no compromises on ethics would take place.